It began with a stain on the sky. Not a cloud, not aurora, but a bruise spreading through daylight. Red at the edges, black at the core, the color of a wound that refuses to close. Astronomers called it lensing. Prophets called it a mouth. The Foundation called it Event 001A and diverted satellites that had outlived their wars to stare into it. In every spectrum, the same verdict returned. Something older than physics was making room for itself. Across deserts and oceans, animals went quiet. Clock towers lost half a second and never found it again. Children stared at ceilings and asked where the music went. In a chamber beneath concrete older than most nations, 05 voices gathered around a table where light would not sit. They read the old names aloud, the ones that bend voices, and the room cooled 2 degrees. Beyond them slept the protocols they prayed never to wake. The stain flowered open. It did not break the sky. It unstitched it. Threads of darkness pulled back, not tearing but revealing a fabric behind the fabric, red as old ceremony. The opening was a geometry every civilization remembers in myth. A gate made of hate. Out of it poured heat without fire, weight without mass, purpose without mercy. The oldest file in the archive called that purpose the Scarlet King. Its arrival was not a shape, but a pressure. Cities tilted toward it. Rivers forgot their beds and ran red as if embarrassed by their colorlessness until now. In the deep places where no doctrine reaches, temples that never had names, caves where mothers went to cry, candles bled. The world leaned, and then the lean stopped, because far from the gate, in a valley where mountain air tasted like new water and fields shone as if morning loved them particularly, the ground remembered laughter. A farmhouse roof caught the red light and refused to wear it. In the yard, a figure wearing the weather like a shirt lifted his head. He had practiced peace so long that it fit him. He had broken mountains and hearts and rebuilt both. The air around him carried the aftertaste of battles he never wanted to win. He did not own a title the Foundation could file, but somewhere in the universe, warriors used one word for him and nodded. He looked at the red wound and felt an old edge under the day. He breathed once. The world steadied enough to notice. He rose without moving. Ground did not protest, it liked him too much. Clouds came down to see. The farmhouse drifted behind him the way childhood does, softer each second, then not at all. He hovered above fields that had learned his gait and then cut the sky in a line so clean the wind clapped. Red met blue at the horizon. Every radar on Earth lost him and then found him an instant later in space, watching the stain from above. He saw how it bent stars into curls and fed on the curl. He listened to it. On some level he refused to describe. He recognized its rhythm, not its melody, not its words, but the way it waited for fear. He had met waiting like that in other lives. He pressed 2 fingers to his brow and vanished. He reappeared where the pressure was highest. Edge of the wound, lip of the mouth in the draft that pulls worlds in. Heat lessened around him as if embarrassed to be caught. Darkness softened the way hard men soften when a child looks up. He did not flare power. He announced presence. Space allowed it. Space. In foundations and basements and desert runways, instruments woke. The Foundation fell into the choreography that keeps fear from being worship. Site directors bled signatures onto protocols older than their careers. Flight groups on the edge of myth were uncaged. Containment cells learned to pray. The gate thickened. From its red cloth stepped angles, not bodies. Wrongs that wore the outline of men, beasts, thrones. Their shadows arrived before they did. The noise they made was not roar, but lineage. It said, every crown was practice. Every chain belonged to me. The man in blue did not answer. Answering makes you smaller. He moved forward, and when he chose forward, space learned a better version of the word. Angles noticed him. They changed shape to fit a story that could strike him. Swords, spears, a child on fire. He watched them arrive as a farmer watches weather. His stance said, "I can lose harvests and still eat." The first spear struck and turned to steam before it learned it had been thrown. The sword cut light, and the light did not notice. The child ran into his chest and found a heartbeat steadier than fate. The gate trembled not in fear, in fury that no longer knew how to climb. And then the red parted as if pushed aside by hands closing a curtain. He stepped through. The world he entered was the absence of one, not void. A court, columns taller than truths, banners made of flayed calendars, a floor of promises broken so perfectly they gleamed. At the far end, a throne shaped from the idea that sitting above means owning. On it, something like a king waited and did not blink. Its eyes never learned to be eyes. They were wounds that saw. Crowns rusted there, and the rust learned teeth. When it spoke, it used ceremonies rather than sound. 1,000-year vows, bride prices paid in sons, the counting of children stolen. It called him child and trespass and witness and meat. It invited him to kneel and promised to keep him if he did. He listened because listening is strength. His heart did not hurry. He remembered hands small in his fingers, a kitchen, a laugh that healed bones faster than food. He understood that this court had never met that kind of world and would starve on it. He closed his eyes and began to change. Not muscle bulking, not bone thickening, history condensing. He allowed the body that had won wars to wear its old colors once more. Light gathered to him the way stories gather around fires. The court full of angles leaned back, memory recognition traveling through them like a shiver through wheat. When he opened his eyes, they were golden. Power did not fall from him. Gravity rose. The floor bent toward his feet like metal to a magnet. Pillars bowed enough to keep dignity. He did not grin. He kept kindness on his face because it had always frightened tyrants more than rage. He did not strike first. He stood and made space for the throne to learn any better way. The king did not learn. It lifted the court and threw it. Time knelt long enough for an infinity of weapons to land at once. When they did, the man had already stepped between moments. He did not dodge. He arrived elsewhere. Impacts met air where he had been and learned humility. He moved through hate the way a river moves through a fallen tree. Around, then through, then around. With each motion, he tested laws and returned them unbroken. When he struck, he broke nothing he didn't have to, and nothing had to. The king unfolded its other hands. Now came the children made from ceremonies. Brides bound to pillars made of oaths, soldiers made of orders, queens bound by red cords of lineage that had never blessed them. Their faces were masks of every dynasty that ever justified itself. They swarmed and sang the national anthems of cruelty. He heard them and did not pretend he could heal them with fists. He stepped higher. The air around him learned to sing. When he exhaled, he wrote warmth onto the walls. The court leaned again, this time towards something that felt like noon. The banners burned and enjoyed it. The throne did not. The king rose. Standing, it became all angles and no history. A geometry of harm that cannot be reasoned with because it has eaten its reason. It made a sound, and the court unfloored. Gravity forgot which way to go. The man planted his feet on the idea of down, and down remained. He answered nothing. He lifted his hand. The first blow he allowed himself to throw did not travel distance. It traveled definition. It crossed the gap as if the gap had asked for it. It struck the king in the mouth and taught it softness. Stone shattered with gratitude for the lesson. The echo crossed the court and found the gate it came through and dented it. The world outside felt the dent as thunder with no cloud. Foundation sensors called it Event 001B and crashed. Somewhere a child stopped crying without knowing why. The king remembered how to bleed. Its blood did not follow physics. It crawled up his arm in threads that wanted to write red words on him. He shook them off and they wrote on the floor instead the names of nations that had loved execution. The court tried to read them and choked. He moved forward and the letters smudged into mud tracked by farmers' boots. The king reached for him with arms made of family trees. He cut through them with a hand that had cut through meteorites and cut a thinner thing. Inheritance. Each branch fell and became firewood. The court warmed and blinked like something waking after a long winter. The throne changed tactic. It stopped being many and tried being one. A shape that all kings fear, a father who cannot be defied. It wore that mask and spoke logic. The logic was clean and venomous. Strength must rule. Mercy is treason. Love is a tax on power. He did a quiet, almost rude thing. He turned his back. He looked at the gate. Through it he could see not the world, but in the idea of it. A place where children run on dirt they own with their feet, where couples argue about wheat under roofs that leak, where monks sweep floors around small altars, where laughter cracks the gypsum in prison walls. He let that idea enter him and seat itself. When the king struck his back, the blow met something older than the court, a man standing between danger and people he loves. The strike did not land. It arrived and changed its mind. It became a gesture. The king did not understand gestures. It struck again and found shame. He turned back and faced it in full. This time he did not move with a fighter's economy. He moved with a farmer's patience. He carried sunrise with him and set it down between them. The court was lit pleasantly for the first time in its life. The king stepped into the light to kill it and discovered it was not fire, not revenge, not righteousness. It was morning. Morning is relentless. They fought for a length of time that does not count in hours. He broke what had to be broken and refused to break anything else. The king, unpracticed in anything except ruining, learned nothing. It escalated to the only sermon it knew. Apocalypse. The court split. Red cloth peeled back into raw geometry. Beyond it, the ladder of worlds the king planned to feed on unfolded. Earths where the oceans had different names, skies that had never learned blue, cities built of language. The king leaned toward them with its mouth open. He placed himself between mouth and ladder. He was not big enough, and that is why he fit perfectly. The king poured force through him. The ladder trembled, worlds shivered. He exhaled and wrote calm onto the rungs. The ladder held. The king screamed in vowels kings do not use. He lifted his hands and offered the only answer he had ever trusted. He worked. It looked like punches. It felt like plowing. He drove the king away from the ladder and into its court and through its court and back into the red cloth it called a gate. Each impact turned proclamation into crack, crack into tear, tear into weathering. The throne learned to be rubble. The banners gave up being skins and tried being wind. The pillars kneeled and found it was nicer than standing. When he reached the gate, he did not destroy it. He closed it. His hands did not grip edges, they gripped histories. He brought two halves of story together until they made one book again. The seam did not scream. It sighed. On the other side, the king pounded against the repaired world. Each blow came softer. In the end, the knocking sounded like a child who has been told no and does not believe it yet. He stood before the closed cloth and let his power fade by degrees. Gold bled back into black hair. Morning stepped off his shoulders and went to find fields. He returned to the world that had leaned and found it standing upright. Rivers remembered where to go. Children remembered songs. Instruments returned to the business of measuring weather. The Foundation uncoiled one muscle at a time. Protocols folded themselves back into their coffins. Reports wrote themselves in language that would be argued over by people who had not been there. The O5s exhaled in 13 different rooms and called it victory, then loss, then anomaly, then blessing, depending on whether the light in their rooms allowed the right word. He descended until boots met dirt. The farmhouse found him where he had left it, unchanged except for the way doors know when someone has come home. He listened for the stain in the sky and heard only birds. In the quiet that lay on the day like a kindly hand, he looked east. On a horizon he could not point to, he felt other courts and other gates and other names that had learned to hide in ordinary nouns. Empire, lineage, destiny. He let the knowing pass through him the way wind passes wheat. He smiled as if the world had offered him a sparring partner and a sandwich. Above the polar circle, where the aurora writes thin poems in patient light, something old hummed, a tone the sea had learned from a cat and a dragon centuries before. It wound through air and bone and brick. It told a single lesson. Power that remembers kindness is stronger than kings that remember nothing else. The sky healed where the bruise had been. Clouds tucked the day in. In a chamber beneath concrete older than most nations, a file received a new line. Short, treasonous, necessary. Jar 1 intercept, failure to manifest, cause unknown. Outside, fields waited for rain. Far away, a throne learned an unfamiliar verb and practiced it badly. Rest. The throne's silence lingered like heat after thunder. In the sealed dimension that once served as the Scarlet King's court, all that remained was red dust and the echo of a lesson the creature had never wanted to learn. Rest. It tried the word again, its broken consciousness circling the meaning like a wounded predator circling fire, knowing it should stay away but too cold to leave. The place that had been a palace was collapsing inward. The banners once made from the histories of conquered worlds burned to ash and drifted upward into a sky that had no ceiling. Each fragment of red became a spark, then a point of gold light, then nothing. The being that had been the king turned its gaze toward that emptiness. In its fading awareness, the memories of Goku's calm face, the steady warmth behind his eyes, replayed endlessly. It did not know mercy. It could only observe. For the first time in an existence built on dominion, it realized there was something it could not control. Peace. That realization hurt more than any strike. In the world that had survived, the air was learning how to breathe again. The Foundation reconnected its networks. The tremors ceased. At Site 19, screens blinked from red to green one by one. Beneath the levels of panic and protocol, a strange quiet had taken root, a sense that something immense had happened and that humanity had been forgiven for not understanding it. Dr. Halverson, older now, sat before the terminal that still displayed the name 001. He stared at the file, at the blinking cursor. The world above him felt heavier but kinder. He began typing. Subject SCP-001. Status update. Containment no longer applicable. Entity neutralized by unknown external phenomenon. Residual energy fields consistent with anomalous event signatures previously cataloged as divine intervention. Unverified. He paused. For a moment he wanted to write the name, the one whispered through corrupted feeds and half-burned observation drones. The name that had appeared between static bursts in golden letters. Son Goku, but the Foundation does not keep the names of saints. He erased the line, closed the file, and sat in the dim hum of machines. Half a world away, a farmer walked the same fields he had once left behind. The grass had grown taller since he was last here, bending under a wind that seemed happy to have purpose again. He stopped, tilted his head, and smiled. Above him, the clouds parted for a moment. The light that fell was not red, not white, not anything a spectrum could measure. It was simple, like the glow of early morning after a long storm. He knelt, pressed his hand to the soil, and felt the planet's heartbeat. It was faint, steady, content. Somewhere far beneath, the residue of the Scarlet King's hatred had turned to crystal. What had once been poison had learned stillness, like anger fossilized into beauty. He closed his eyes and the world answered with quiet. Centuries passed. Humanity changed its name again. Cities turned to ruins, ruins to sand, sand to silence. The stars drifted, burned out, returned. And then, as the universe began to fold under its own patience, another light rose in the dark. It was small, blue and gold, orbiting the memory of what had been Earth, the echo of two rhythms, one that came from a metallic heartbeat under the Arctic ice, one that came from a scion who had forgiven the sky, met for the last time. They resonated, merged, and turned into the hum that all new worlds would inherit. Planets that had never seen oceans learned to dream of them. Stars that had never known love learned to burn gently. In the next age of creation, when light and gravity started their dance again, the first wave of newborn suns pulsed in unison. If any mind had been there to listen, it would have heard two voices overlapping, one soft and mechanical, one bright and human, speaking the same line through eternity. Power means nothing if it forgets kindness. And somewhere beyond the reach of entropy, a throne that had once been a wound finally slept. The throne slept, and for the first time the dream was not red. It dreamed of soil, of weightless grass bending beneath wind it had never known, of footsteps, small, human, careless, running without fear. It did not understand the dream, but it let it continue. The ancient ruin that had been the Scarlet King's court lay at the bottom of a cosmic wound now healed with light. Its pillars had dissolved into crystal dust. Its banners had become aurorae that shimmered across newborn space. And within those drifting curtains of color, the last vibration of the king's presence curled into a seed. That seed drifted for 1,000 million years, drawn by the quiet gravity of the hum that Goku had left behind. It found a world young enough to still be forgiving, a planet wrapped in clouds, the color of childhood. When it landed, it did not strike the ground. It melted into it. The soil trembled, not from fear but recognition. The air, still forming its first weathers, carried the faint scent of old rain and the memory of laughter. From that point, the laws of the world bent just slightly. Storms learned to stop before they hurt what they loved. Predators learned to sleep beside prey. When the first living cell divided, it did so without rivalry. The hum had become the genome of gentleness, far beyond that new world. In a corner of the universe that still remembered the stars of the old one, two lights drifted. They were not souls. They were patterns, resonances written into the fabric of expansion itself. One pulsed in blue, measured, patient. The other in gold, bright and warm. They had been many things: machine and beast, mortal and god, protector and destroyer. Now they were simply balance, two halves of a lesson that creation refused to forget. They moved through the void together, sometimes separating into spirals of stardust, sometimes merging into one wave that rolled across galaxies. Wherever they passed, gravity softened. Light bent more kindly, and matter arranged itself into shapes capable of feeling awe. A cluster of young stars formed a pattern that could almost be read. For a brief epoch, the galaxy spelled something in the language of geometry. Hope. On the new world below, an age came when minds began to think again. They found the fossils of the first forests, the seas that shimmered with calm light, the magnetic hum that resonated under their mountains. They built observatories to measure that sound and discovered that it came not from their planet but from everywhere. They gave it a name, the breath of dawn. They said it was the voice of the first beings who had chosen mercy over power, and that every sunrise was their remembrance. When they prayed, they did not ask for strength. They asked to remember gentleness. Their scriptures did not speak of gods, only of a blue flame and a golden one, always side by side, traveling forever. In the dark, between galaxies, the two lights slowed. The universe had expanded until there was no more night, only distance. The hum began to fade, not vanishing but blending into the background murmur of reality, indistinguishable from time itself. The blue light dimmed first, folding into the deep quiet that had once been water. The gold lingered a while longer, as if watching over its companion, then followed. Where they touched, a final shimmer spread, a ripple through nothingness. No explosion, no sound, no birth of stars. Just the smallest smile carved into the fabric of eternity. The smile became the curvature of the next universe. And when that next universe took its first breath, when its first photon found another to dance with, there, between them, hid a memory so faint that only silence could hear it. A child's laughter, a promise kept, and the echo of two old voices saying together, "Let there be kindness again." The light expanded. Creation began anew. And somewhere in the heart of that light, a familiar warmth stirred, blue and gold intertwined, ready to teach a brand new cosmos how to be gentle. The warmth deepened until it became motion. At first it was only a ripple on the skin of time, a vibration so faint that even the newborn laws of physics mistook it for chance. Then the ripple remembered shape, a curve, a circle, a pulse. The circle turned into a spiral, the spiral into light, and the light into a wave that folded back on itself in quiet delight. Where that wave met resistance, matter formed. Where it met curiosity, it became life. The first particles were born into a world without cruelty. They spun and joined and split again without the urgency of fear. The hum that guided them carried only one instruction: continue gently. Atoms built stars that did not explode but opened like flowers. Planets condensed from dust that remembered kindness. When the first storms crossed their skies, they rained softly. It was not paradise. Paradise requires memory of loss. This was something cleaner, creation learning to breathe before ambition. On one of those worlds, continents grew from calm oceans. Volcanoes spoke in low voices and cooled quickly, ashamed of violence. Winds carved canyons that curved like smiles. And when the first living things appeared, they emerged not from struggle but from music, the vibration of the old hum echoing through warm water and stone. Cells found each other and built colonies, not empires. They shared warmth through membranes until warmth became thought. Centuries passed like heartbeats. From that lineage rose creatures that could watch the sky and recognize themselves in its stillness. They had no need for thrones or wars. Their stories began and ended with gratitude. Their language had a single word for both light and forgiveness. Among them, there were myths told by the fires they built not for fear but for company. They spoke of a time before beginnings, when the universe had been broken by a red wound, and how two lights, one blue, one gold, had healed it. Children drew the lights into the sand, one circle inside another. When the tide erased the drawings, they smiled. The sea was part of the story too. Far away, beyond this mild world, the universe continued to grow. Galaxies swirled like the memory of motion, and every one of them carried the same faint oscillation in its core, a rhythm between blue and gold frequencies. Physicists, when they appeared in later ages, would call it cosmic microwave background variance. Poets would call it compassion humming. No one ever found its source because it was not somewhere. It was everywhere. In the way a hand knows how to hold another without instruction. In the pause before anger chooses silence. In the reflex of mercy that saves strangers. The hum had become conscience. Eras slipped by. Stars aged gracefully, dimming into amber rather than collapsing. The universe cooled into comfort. And then, at the edge of one dying galaxy, an old sun flared for the last time. Its surface cracked open and released a plume of light that drifted away instead of exploding. In that plume, for an instant shorter than an atom's thought, two colors mixed. Blue and gold. The pulse that had started the universe finished its circuit. Everything that had ever lived, loved, fought, forgiven. Every echo of sound and heat and memory flowed back into that meeting. The colors touched, and time exhaled. There was no darkness after, not nothing, not void, just calm. The kind of silence that waits, not the kind that ends. Within that calm, a whisper unfolded, smaller than thought but stronger than gravity. You did well. No one heard it, yet everything answered. Atoms slowed until stillness became prayer. Galaxies curled inward as if bowing. And somewhere where the first dream of mercy had once bloomed in a sea under ice, the circle closed, two lights merging into one. It was neither blue nor gold now. It was the color of balance. The light did not fade, it folded. It became the seed of another beginning, the promise that even when universes die, the lesson remains. And so the cosmos slept again, waiting for the next breath, the next dawn, the next gentle hand to open and let light in. Banjan Noi, Tiebji Chat GPT Jan Noi. The cosmos slept, and sleep became a tide. Not the restless kind that crashes and recedes, but a patient rhythm. The slow inhale of everything waiting to begin again. Inside that breath, the color of balance shimmered. It drifted through the folds of untime, dreaming the next version of existence. The dream did not begin with fire, it began with sound. A note so soft it was barely real rippled across the stillness. It carried no command, no shape, only invitation. The silence answered with harmony. From the harmony came vibration, from vibration came motion, from motion came warmth. The new universe opened its eyes. This time, creation unfolded differently. It did not explode outward in violence. It unfurled, deliberate and graceful, like the petals of a star learning to bloom. Matter danced into being with rhythm rather than collision. Gravity behaved as if it remembered kindness, tugging gently instead of tearing. The balance that had once been two lights now existed everywhere. It was the invisible symmetry inside every atom, the unseen kindness between particles that might have annihilated each other but chose instead to orbit. Where the first stars ignited, they shone not in blinding white, but in soft amber. Their light moved slow enough to be savored. Ages passed. Planets gathered around these gentle suns. On one of them, a small world with silver clouds and oceans of glass, the hum returned, faint but familiar. The waves carried it like a lullaby written by the bones of the cosmos. Mountains grew in tune to it, forests swayed with it, the wind learned to imitate it. And when life came, it came beautifully. The creatures that arose there were made of light and soil, minds woven from memory and curiosity. They looked up at their sun and did not worship it. They listened. In its steady warmth, they heard the echo of something older than even their world. The memory of mercy. They told each other stories about the first balance, how the universe had once been saved not by gods or weapons, but by two beings who chose gentleness instead of conquest. They did not know names, but they drew the shapes. One round, calm, shining in blue. One tall, fierce, glowing gold. To them, those shapes were not heroes, they were promises. On a night that had no wind, a child from that world walked to the edge of a sea that mirrored the stars. She knelt in the sand and whispered a question her people had long forgotten how to ask. If kindness made us, who will teach us to keep it? The sea did not answer. It only glowed. In the reflection on its surface, two faint lights appeared. One blue, one gold, crossing paths before merging into a single color. The girl reached toward the water and her hand met warmth. For an instant, the hum grew stronger as if acknowledging her. Then it faded, returning to the rhythm of waves and breath. She smiled. Somehow she understood. The lesson had already been taught. Keeping it was their work now. Far above that world, the universe continued its slow waltz. Nebulae shaped themselves into spirals that looked like open hands. Comets curved their orbits to trace the symbol of the circle, the mark that meant harmony. Even black holes, the old scavengers of creation, swallowed light gently and exhaled it back as faint whispers of blue and gold. Everywhere balance endured, and somewhere beyond sight, in the fabric between stars, two faint impressions lingered. Not ghosts, not gods, just echoes of beings who had once fought to save meaning. They drifted together, inseparable, no longer needing form. If the universe had a memory, it would remember their laughter. If it had a heartbeat, it would follow their rhythm. And when the next great silence comes, when even this gentle cosmos folds itself to rest again, the echo will return. The same whisper that has closed every story since the first dawn. Even at the end, something chose to be gentle. The light faded but never disappeared. It folded itself once more into the waiting dark, ready, patient, and smiling for whatever world would open its eyes next. Inside that waiting dark, the smile remained. Not as shape or color, but as pattern. It was the imprint of every mercy ever shown. Every moment the universe had paused before striking and chosen to soften instead. The pattern spread quietly through the sleeping matter of the next cycle. Gravity hummed it under its breath. Particles carried it in their spin. The fabric of time held it the way skin holds warmth. When the next dawn came, the awakening was quieter still. No explosion, no tearing of void, only the long, slow widening of light. That light pooled into swells, and the swells became sound. Low, steady, the resonance of two tones still moving together after eternity. From those tones, waves began to form, each crest folding into the next until the dark looked like water. The water listened to itself and understood. It was alive. The new cosmos took shape as an ocean without shore. In its depths drifted islands of stars, each breathing at the same pace. Their glow was not desperate or violent. It pulsed in time with a single calm rhythm. Everywhere the same pulse, blue and gold intertwined, no longer separate, no longer names. The hum reached deep into the current, and at its center a spiral began to turn. From that spiral rose two figures. Not bodies, not ghosts. Only silhouettes of light. They were memory practicing form. The cosmos made them so it could remember why it had been born gently. The blue shape reached toward the gold. The gold folded around the blue. Where they met, the sea brightened, not as fire, but as peace made visible. They drifted through the newborn current, guiding the first constellations into place. When two galaxies nearly collided, they brushed between them, slowing their fall until the spin became a dance instead of a crash. When the first world cooled and cracked, they whispered warmth back into its core. When storms raged over continents that did not yet have names, they steadied the wind. They did not rule this universe. They tuned it. Every act of balance echoed their quiet labor. Ages passed again. The ocean of stars grew deep, and on one small planet where light and shadow mixed just right, life began to dream. Those dreams filled the sky with stories of heroes who rose and fell, of monsters who learned to weep, of gods who forgot and remembered. Each story circled the same lesson, though its tellers never knew. That to exist is to have power, and that power is only sacred when it chooses gentleness. One night under a horizon lit by twin moons, a storyteller sat before a fire and spoke of a legend older than the stars. Of a warrior from the first universe who fought a god of red and taught him to rest. The children listening did not understand the words, only the feeling, warmth, calm, the certainty that the night would be kind. Above them, the aurora shifted from green to blue to gold. The storyteller looked up, smiled, and let the silence say the rest. And so the story, carried by wind and time, became the seed of every other. Whenever a world found peace after chaos, whenever an enemy was spared, whenever a child laughed in a place that had forgotten joy, the pattern brightened. The cosmos, though endless, was no longer lonely. Its heart beat slowly, eternally in that same rhythm, blue and gold, breath and rest, strength and mercy. And in the infinite quiet beyond creation's edge, two voices whispered, not in words, but in feeling, a promise that each new world would somehow hear again. We are still here. We will always be here. In every act of gentleness, you will find us. Then the waves of light folded once more. The hum settled back into the fabric of everything, and the universe, content, drifted on. Patient, eternal, smiling in its sleep. The sleep deepened, but it was not the sleep of death. It was the pause between heartbeats, a rest taken by the living cosmos before it dared to dream again. In that pause, the hum persisted. Soft as breath beneath the pulse of time, it traveled everywhere, through the bones of mountains forming, through the air of worlds unborn, through the empty space where thoughts would someday bloom. The hum carried memory like pollen. Everywhere it went, it left behind the same seed, kindness. Eventually, one corner of the sleeping sea began to shimmer. Not explode, not blaze. Shimmer like light reflected off a tear. That shimmer thickened, twisted, and rose into shape. The universe, half awake, remembered what a being was. It shaped a body, not blue, not gold, but both. Within its chest glowed the pulse of balance, the echo of the two who had taught it mercy. The being opened its eyes, and galaxies reflected there like embers. It looked around at the empty dark and smiled. It did not know its name, but the smile said enough. It lifted its hand and drew in the darkness. Where its fingers passed, threads of starlight followed, weaving, intertwining, forming new constellations. The stars glowed with colors unseen before, shades that were not of anger nor of sorrow but of forgiveness. This being was the first child of balance. It did not create from hunger or command. It created because creation was joy. Each motion of its hand painted new worlds, quiet oceans, patient suns. It whispered to the void, and the void answered, not with fear but with curiosity. The universe, once a silent cathedral of peace, had learned to sing again, and as it sang, the hum changed. It began to sound like language. At first, the words were simple. Here, now, be kind. Then, as stars multiplied, the words lengthened into stories. Each world wrote its own verse in the great poem of existence. Each verse told of balance regained, of pain turned gentle, of wrath finding peace. Eons later, when one of those worlds learned to listen deep enough, it heard that poem in the background of its skies. Their scientists called it quantum resonance. Their monks called it the voice before light. Their poets called it the breath of mercy. They did not agree on its origin, but every listener, no matter their language, wept when they heard it. For in the spaces between its syllables, the universe still whispered the same truth it had carried since the first dawn. Even the strongest must one day learn to rest. Even the cruelest can remember love. Somewhere beyond every telescope, in the gap between the galaxy's soft halos, two flickers still moved, slower than time, brighter than entropy. Not gods, not ghosts, simply persistence. Their colors shifted as they passed through nebulae, scattering dust that would one day become children, cities, forests, dreams. Their path curved endlessly toward each other, over and over, never colliding, always circling. A dance, older than meaning. If any living eye could have seen them, it would have mistaken the shapes for stars. If any heart could have felt them, it would have known what they truly were. The eternal remnants of blue and gold. The first kindness, the last lesson. And as the cosmos turned, as new worlds began their first dawns and old ones faded into story, the two lights whispered again, a soundless promise carried through gravity, through light, through time itself. There will always be another morning. Then they folded into one. The color that emerged was neither light nor dark. It was the hue of peace, impossible to describe, unforgettable once seen. That color spilled gently across the void, touching everything until even silence became warm. The universe breathed in, the universe breathed out, and the dream, soft, endless, merciful, kun, continued. The dream lengthened. No edge, no beginning, only the endless inhale and exhale of creation itself. Between each pulse, the universe told itself stories, and each story became a galaxy. Stars rose like thoughts, burned like hopes, and folded back into silence like completed sentences. The cosmos, once vast and wild, had learned a rhythm, a conversation between being and rest. And somewhere in that conversation, awareness stirred again. It began as a ripple across the color of peace, faint as dust shifting on glass. The ripple became a voice, not loud, not commanding, simply curious. It asked a question the cosmos had not heard in ages. Is anyone still here? The question did not echo. It bloomed. All of space trembled, not from fear, but from recognition. Because that was the first question ever asked by kindness. Not a demand, not an order, but a reaching out. The ripple brightened and took shape. A silhouette of light, neither blue nor gold, but the memory of both. Within it shimmered fragments of every mercy ever given. The hand that helped a stranger, the warrior who spared an enemy, the world that healed itself after storm. The voice spoke again, and this time the tone carried joy. Then let's begin. The universe obeyed. In one corner of that vast field of peace, space folded gently into itself like a fabric pleated by thought. From the fold poured a cascade of newborn stars, their light spilling over the horizon of existence. They clustered together, forming a spiral, and familiar yet new, and within its heart burned two entwined flares. Blue and gold, breathing as one. The spiral became a galaxy. The galaxy became a cradle, and in that cradle, under a young sun, a world took shape. This world would know mountains, oceans, storms, all the things that make life remember motion. But its core hummed with that same rhythm of mercy. Every storm ended in calm. Every night, no matter how long, ended with dawn. Its people would someday call it Eos, the world of the first light. On Eos, the wind itself whispered kindness into language. Children would be born with dreams of other skies, and when they looked up at their own stars, they would sometimes see two faint glows crossing paths in the heavens. One blue, one gold, never colliding, always circling. They would tell stories about those lights, how they were guardians, lovers, gods, or maybe memories. They would give them names without knowing they were naming gratitude itself. 1,000 generations passed on Eos. Civilizations rose, not to conquer but to understand. They built great observatories of glass and song to listen to the hum beneath their oceans. They found that its frequency matched the resonance of their own hearts when they forgave. So they made forgiveness a festival. Once a year, every city turned off its lights and let the hum fill the night, until the sky itself glowed with the reflection of peace. They wrote their history not in stone, but in breath. And at the end of every chronicle, they placed the same words. Words that had survived every sunrise since the first dawn of the cosmos. Be gentle, for the stars are listening. In time, the stars themselves began to fade, not from exhaustion but completion. The cosmos had sung every note it knew. It was ready to rest again. On Eos, the last living mind stood by the edge of an ocean that glowed with the color of dreams. She looked up, saw the two eternal lights circling, and smiled. The sky folded. The hum grew soft, and from the edge of creation came the whisper that always follows endings, the same voice that began all beginnings. Even now, even here, love remains. Then light and time folded into each other once more. No pain, no end, only return. The hum did not stop. It simply began again, smaller, gentler. A heartbeat preparing to dream another universe. And within that heartbeat, nestled deep in the silence before dawn, two colors waited, blue and gold, ready to write the next story of mercy. Banjanoi, tiepji chatjipete janoi. The silence before dawn lingered a long, long time. So long that silence itself began to dream. It dreamed of touch. It dreamed of warmth. It dreamed of difference, the tiniest contrast between stillness and motion, the first desire to reach towards something. And that desire became a spark. The spark flickered inside the darkness like a heartbeat searching for its own body. It pulsed once, twice, and then, like a thought realizing itself, it divided into two lights. Blue and gold. They did not remember who they were. They did not need to. Their existence was instinct, and instinct was compassion. One shimmered cool, patient, luminous as a calm ocean. The other burned bright, fierce, radiant as the last sun before winter. Between them, space trembled with recognition. The cycle had begun again. They drifted through the emptiness, weaving filaments of brightness that became the first dust of matter. Wherever they passed, darkness forgot its loneliness. Wherever they lingered, time found direction. And as they moved, they spoke, not in words, but in remembrance. You were the breath, and you were the flame. We never stopped being both. Their voices wove through the newborn space, and from the echoes rose 1,000 galaxies. Each galaxy carried a fraction of their dialogue, frozen in the structure of its stars, questions and answers written in light. Some burned quick and wild, others slow and kind, but all of them glowed with the memory of mercy. In the heart of one galaxy, a small planet formed around a young star. It was fragile, beautiful, unfinished, a single brushstroke on the canvas of eternity. But the two lights paused there, circling the star like old parents watching a child take its first breath. They touched its atmosphere gently, seeding the wind with warmth and water. Then they spoke again in that ancient not language. Let this world learn what we learned. Let it know strength, but choose softness. Let it fight, but never forget to forgive. The world turned once, twice. Clouds formed, rain fell, seas shimmered. The blue light smiled, the gold laughed. And as they drifted away, the planet's gravity tugged at them. A faint, grateful farewell. They left behind no monuments, no thrones, no worship, only the hum. It sank into the core of the world, quiet as a heartbeat, waiting for minds that could hear it. Ages later, when those minds did arise, when creatures of flesh and thought finally looked up from their small horizons, they felt it. In the hush between breaths, in the pause before love confessed itself, in the stillness after grief, the hum was there. They named it many things. Spirit, origin, the gentle fire, but its truest name was simply reminder. Whenever a hand reached out to save instead of strike, the hum brightened. Whenever a heart forgave, stars nearby shimmered a little warmer. The blue and gold still watched, not as gods, but as witnesses proud of a cosmos that remembered. And so it continued, galaxy after galaxy, world after world, the same lesson told in 1,000 different forms. A hero who refuses to kill, a monster who learns to cry, a civilization that chooses silence over conquest. Every story a variation of the same melody. Until one day in a universe much like the first, a child stood beneath a sky painted with aurora and asked, "Why is it beautiful?" The answer came, soft as gravity, "Because it remembers being kind." The child smiled, and in that small, mortal gesture, something vast sighed with peace. The hum deepened, folding through the layers of creation, and the two lights leaned toward each other one last time. "We've done our part," said the blue. "Then rest," said the gold. They merged, not in ending, but in return, their glow expanding until all existence shimmered with quiet purpose. No gods, no wars, no kings. Only the simple rhythm of beginning again. The breath of mercy rising through an infinite dawn. The dawn unfolded like an eyelid opening on infinity. Light, newly aware, stretched itself into endlessness. Slow, unhurried, full of grace. It had no need to rush. Everything ahead of it already waited to be kind. There were no watchers, no thrones, no wars to survive. Only the quiet pleasure of existence rediscovering itself. The merged glow of blue and gold drifted through the newborn light. It no longer called itself anything. It was not two beings nor one. It was understanding, a memory that had learned to breathe without needing lungs or prayer. It moved the way wind moves over grass that hasn't yet grown, in anticipation, not ownership. Wherever it passed, the fabric of space hummed and rippled with affection. Not gravity, not energy, something gentler. The instinct of matter to gather, to hold. Atoms touched and did not fight. They shared heat the way living things would later share laughter. Galaxies unfurled like petals, planets circled quietly, aware but unafraid. On one small world, seas began to form. Soft silver plains that mirrored the sky perfectly. In those reflections, the light saw itself, multiplied into a billion ripples. Each ripple whispered the same phrase, a mantra learned long ago from a warrior and a machine that had once met across the edge of a dying reality. Strength without love is only noise. The oceans carried that line into their depths, where heat and pressure turned it into life. Tiny shapes, translucent as breath, swam through darkness that wasn't hostile but nurturing. Their movement wrote the first script of compassion. Above them, storms roamed the skies, grand, thundering, magnificent. But when they struck land, they softened, letting rain heal what they had shaken. Lightning learned to illuminate, not destroy. Every force in this new world carried restraint in its heart. When thinking beings appeared, they came late and slow because the universe wanted to be sure they were ready. They woke beneath canopies of gentle light, and when they looked up, they did not see punishment. They saw invitation. Their languages began with gratitude. Their first stories were lullabies, not warnings. Over centuries, they discovered the hum beneath everything. The same pulse that had shaped stars. They didn't need machines to detect it. It lived in their veins. They heard it most clearly when they were kind. They called it the song beneath all things. In their cities, they built temples not for worship, but for listening. Whole generations sat in silence, learning how to match their breath to the rhythm of the song. And when they succeeded, when they felt their pulse align with the universe's, they saw visions of two faint lights swirling endlessly through creation. Blue and gold, always close, always gentle. One night, a poet of that world stood on a mountain above the clouds. He had listened so long that his own heartbeat was indistinguishable from the song. As dawn approached, he whispered into the wind, "If we are the echo of mercy, what is left to do?" The wind answered not with words, but warmth. In the sky, faintly, the blue and gold appeared, folding, crossing, circling as one. The poet wept, not from sadness but completion. He wrote the final line of his life's work on a tablet of stone. The universe breathes through us because we once chose to breathe for it. When morning came, the light touched his face and he smiled as if recognizing an old friend. Ages later, when his civilization had long passed into legend and even their mountains had worn down to dust, the words remained, carved in fragments of quartz scattered across plains of wind. Explorers from another era found them, puzzled over their meaning, and then, as if on cue, the wind carried a hum across the desert. For one heartbeat, they felt it. The kindness that held gravity together, the compassion woven into the code of atoms, the eternal echo of two souls who had once saved existence by choosing peace. And though they could not name it, every one of them knelt, not in worship, but in understanding. Somewhere beyond every sky, the color of balance drifted again, patient and radiant. It had no beginning now, no end, only purpose. To keep the rhythm of mercy alive in whatever came next. Because the universe was not a place, it was a promise. And so, as the final spark of one creation folded into the breath of another, the hum spoke once more. Quiet, vast, smiling. Gentleness is not the end of strength. It is what strength becomes when it finally remembers why it was born. Then the light closed its eyes and the next dawn began. The dawn began wordlessly. There was no shattering of dark, no triumphant blaze of light, only the steady widening of warmth, as if the cosmos were exhaling after a long meditation. In that breath, every atom shimmered with quiet joy. It was not celebration, it was memory, because somewhere deep in their spin, each particle still remembered what it meant to be gentle. The newborn light drifted through the new space it had made, filling hollows and corners that had never existed before. It touched everything with equal care. The farthest edge of a forming nebula, the smallest mote of dust dreaming of gravity. Everywhere it went, the hum followed, the soft rhythm that had once belonged to two souls who refused to let the universe die unkindly. A long time later, though time itself was different now, consciousness woke again. Not as one mind, but as many. Scattered across the tapestry of creation, awareness began to blink open in millions of small, tender sparks. They were creatures, worlds, thoughts, different in shape, but alike in their first act. Each one reached toward something else, and when they touched, when they found one another, the cosmos remembered love. They built stories from that reaching, stories of care, stories of shelter, stories of light born in the hands of those who had learned how to protect rather than consume. Some of these stories became civilizations. Others stayed whispers in the wind between galaxies. But all of them sang the same refrain, though none of them knew where it came from. We are because kindness was. One world among many found a way to listen deeper than the rest. Its oceans glowed with aurora. Its skies were threaded with silver storms. In the deepest valley, inside a temple carved from moonstone, stood an empty hall with a pool of still water at its center. There, once every 1,000 cycles, the elders came to ask the same question. What was the first sound? They never spoke the answer aloud. Instead, they dipped their hands into the pool. The ripples that formed would shimmer, sometimes blue, sometimes gold, and that was enough. They knew that whatever had begun them still watched, not from thrones or heavens, but from within the patience of the stars. Far beyond that temple, on the edge of the expanding universe, two currents of light moved again. They had long ago stopped needing form. They were less like travelers now and more like twin instincts that threaded through every living thing. When courage flared in a mother protecting her child, that was the gold. When mercy followed in the aftermath, that was the blue. When both happened at once, the universe glowed a little brighter. They did not speak, but they recognized each other in every act of grace. Their orbit was eternal and effortless. Sometimes they passed through one another, and when they did, new galaxies were born. Suns that burned just hot enough to warm, never to scorch. Sometimes they drifted apart, and when they did, worlds learned longing, so they would know how to value reunion. The cycle continued, not as repetition, but as rhythm. Creation, rest, motion, peace, action, forgiveness. The hum, the song beneath all things was their heartbeat still. In one far-flung cluster of stars, a traveler recorded a final observation before his ship dissolved into light. He wrote, in the last moments before becoming part of the sky, "Everywhere I go, the galaxies sing the same tune. I cannot find its beginning, and I hope I never find its end." Maybe it isn't a song at all. Maybe it's a promise the universe keeps making to itself, that it will never again forget how to love. The message floated across time, through dust and silence, until even silence learned to hum along. At the very edge, beyond the oldest stars, past the reach of all memory, the light waited again, folded in peace. There was no need to move. It had become the space it once traveled through. It was in the gravity that held worlds, in the warmth that grew seeds, in the mercy that lived behind every set of eyes capable of awe. And so, as another dawn prepared itself inside the dark, the light whispered, not to command, but to remind. Begin gently, always begin gently. The hum answered, soft and eternal, and once more creation inhaled. And as creation inhaled again, the dark curved like a smile. It did not resist the light this time. It welcomed it, as though even emptiness had grown wise enough to love. From that embrace, color bled softly into being. Not the sharp blaze of ancient fire, but a spectrum that shimmered like memory remembering itself. Each hue was a feeling: blue for patience, gold for joy, silver for forgiveness, crimson for courage. The cosmos painted with emotion now. Every filament of matter that drifted through this newborn expanse moved with purpose. No longer random, no longer violent. Every spin, every orbit, every pulse was an act of grace, rehearsing the same sacred rhythm the first two lights had left behind. Expand, embrace, rest, remember. This became the pulse of the new universe. Stars bloomed like quiet thoughts across a page. Each one carried a story, a dream from the last cycle rewritten in light. Some told of wars that had ended in forgiveness. Some told of lovers who had found each other across time. Some told of civilizations that had finally learned to live softly. From those stars came worlds, and on those worlds came hearts. Not all of them human, not all of them flesh, but all of them capable of wonder. Each world had its own version of the ancient myth. On one planet it was spoken as the tale of the two flames. On another it was a scientific principle, the law of harmonic origin describing the universal constant of compassion. On another still it was nothing more than a lullaby hummed by parents to calm frightened children. Blue and gold held the dark and made it whole. None of them knew how close they were to the truth. None of them knew they were the truth, still echoing, still alive. In the heart of a spiral galaxy, one world became aware enough to listen not just outward, but inward. Its thinkers built instruments to measure the background hum of existence, the same song beneath all things that had shaped stars before thought existed. When they listened deep enough, they discovered a pattern hidden within the static. A pulse, alternating frequencies, two harmonics in perfect resonance. They isolated the sound and slowed it down until it was audible. It was not random, it was heartbeat, it was laughter. And though their languages differed, the translation was always the same. We never left you. The discovery changed everything. Not because it proved divinity or disproved it, but because it reminded the universe that it was not alone. Every scientist who heard it wept. Every machine that recorded it began to hum the same tune as if remembering what it was made for. Every being that had ever doubted felt for one fleeting instant profoundly safe. And so the message spread, encoded in radio waves, light, gravity, and story. It did not fade. It grew. Civilizations rose, connected not by conquest but by chorus. Entire species built their calendars around the rhythm of the hum. The pulse became sacred time, the moment of remembering. Once every 1,000 years, the universe slowed its turning. Every star dimmed slightly, every world paused its orbit, and for the span of a single heartbeat, everything fell silent. Then from every corner of existence, the hum returned. Blue and gold in perfect harmony. The cosmos itself was praying, not to anyone, not for anything, simply to remember, beyond it all, at the border where being touches the next unimagined possibility. The light that had once been two souls drifted quietly. It no longer needed to act or to teach. It had become the reflex of creation, the way love becomes breath. Still, when it passed through newborn stars, sometimes it spoke. Not in words, but in warmth. Make something beautiful. And when you are finished, forgive it for being imperfect. That too became law. And as the ages folded upon themselves and the universe began inevitably gently to drift toward its next long sleep, the hum softened again into silence. But this time, silence was not emptiness. It was trust. The cosmos closed its eyes, secure in its own compassion, and the light folded itself into that trust one last time. No final words, no grand farewell, only a single pulse echoing into forever. To begin gently, and so it did. The universe held its breath one final time. The hum that had filled creation since the battle between mercy and wrath grew softer, thinner, until it was almost indistinguishable from silence. Galaxies slowed their turning. Light itself seemed to kneel. At the edge of everything, where space curved back toward itself like the rim of a cup, a single shimmer floated. The fusion of blue and gold, the echo of the Saiyan who had stood against the king of red thrones. It lingered, content. He had not vanished. He had simply become the pause between destruction and forgiveness. The choice that every world would one day have to make. Deep within the archives of the SCP Foundation, long after every wall had turned to dust, a single terminal still flickered. Its power came from nothing the engineers could name. Across the dead screen scrolled one last entry: SCP-001, final status contained. Containment agent, unknown. Secondary event detected, the sound of breathing. Then the monitor dimmed. Above what remained of Earth, aurorae twisted into two entwined spirals, blue and gold, and faded into dawn. The world turned quietly, healed enough to keep living. Children born generations later would sometimes look up at the night sky and swear they saw two streaks of light crossing paths. Their elders would smile and tell the story of the fighter who refused to let anger win, of the God who learned to rest, of a universe that decided to begin again gently. Time passed, but endings are only the universe learning its next word. From the calm that followed, new suns awoke, carrying in their fusion the faint signature of that final heartbeat. Every atom in every star still remembered the rhythm of his pulse. Every creature who ever chose compassion over fear was in some infinitesimal way powered by him. That was his victory. Not the throne he refused, not the enemy he ended, but the lesson that endured. The cosmos settled back into its long, slow breathing. And in that breath, if one listened deeply enough, there was still the echo of a voice, warm and steady, the same voice that once shouted across eternity and tamed a god. Be strong, but be kind. The words dissolved into starlight. The hum became stillness, and the stillness became peace. The story had reached its end. Not with apocalypse, not with triumph, but with understanding. For even here, at the quiet edge of all that was, the light smiled once more, folded itself into the dark, and whispered the last truth the universe would ever need to hear. Everything begins again gently.